Hello everyone and welcome back to Nishma's Edu Launch. So in today's session, we'll be starting off with a new topic, that is management of working capital. In the last class, we have finished off with the portion of redemption of preference shares. If you have not watched it, please do watch that. So let us quickly go on to the session. So a capital of the company can be divided into two types. This is the capital and we will divide that into two. One is fixed capital and working capital. So what do you mean by fixed capital? Fixed capital is nothing but the investment made in fixed assets such as land, plant and machinery, buildings, etc. So it is also known as block capital. Block capital. It remains in the business for a long period of time. So it is the amount required to purchase the fixed assets of the business organization. Whereas working capital is the amount invested in current assets. It's the amount invested in current assets, which include debtors, stock, then your cash, bank, etc. So this is what is known as working capital, and working capital is also known as floating capital, circulating capital, and also revolving capital. There are reasons why working capital is known as floating capital, circulating capital, and revolving capital, which we will see in later in this session. So mainly capital will be divided into two types, that is fixed capital and working capital. Fixed capital is for purchasing the fixed assets such as land, building, machinery, etc. And working capital is the amount that is invested in current asset. In other words, you can also call it, this is the capital that is required for the day-to-day operations of business. So in this coming up videos, we will be discussing about the working capital management, the methods of calculating a working capital, and so on. So let us move on to the next session, that is components of working capital. So working capital consists of two components. They are current assets and current liabilities. Current asset includes cash, bank, inventories, trade receivables, and prepaid expenses, and other short-term advances also. Then coming to current liabilities, we have sundry creditors, bills payable, outstanding expenses, provision for taxation, etc. So these are the two components of working capital. Now let us discuss the different types of working capital. Coming to types of working capital, we have permanent working capital, temporary working capital, zero working capital, and redundant working capital. Now let us discuss each one of them in detail. First of all, permanent working capital. Permanent working capital means that is the amount that remains in the business as fixed amount. Alright, so it is similar to banks keeping certain amount of their deposits as a reserve. So similarly, for every business organization, they'll have to keep certain amount fixed in the business for meeting contingencies. So that is what is known as permanent working capital. As the name suggests, it remains fixed in the business. Then it is also known as hardcore working capital. Then the second one is temporary working capital. Everything is the same as what the name says. Alright, so temporary working capital means it is something that is not fixed. It varies with the level of business. That is, in certain seasons like festive seasons, the business will require more amount of funds to meet their growing demands. So at that time, the working capital requirement will be higher. So that is what is known as temporary working capital. The fund that is needed in excess of the normal working capital. That is what is known as temporary working capital. Now the third one is zero working capital. Now that is something interesting and it's also very important. This is very important. That is zero working capital. That means the current asset of the business will be equivalent to current liabilities. That is, your current assets will be just sufficient to pay off all your current liabilities. Now, this is a desired level of working capital, but it only happens in the rare situations. It is not found everywhere and every time. So, but this is a desired level of working capital. The main aim of raising current asset is to pay off current liabilities. So, if your current asset is just equivalent to your current liabilities, that means you have an adequate level of working capital. It is no less or not high. Okay, so that is about zero working capital. Now coming to redundant working capital, that means you have excess of working capital. Excess of working capital that required. So that is a danger zone, because if you have too much of working capital, that means the useful funds of business are locked up in current assets such as inventories. That is not good for the health of business organizations. Business will not have sufficient amount to carry out its day-to-day operations. That is not good for organizations. So with respect to working capital, the level of working capital to be maintained is just adequate. That is, sufficient amount should only be maintained under working capital. It should not be not too more and it should not be not too less. If you have more amount of working capital, that means you don't have sufficient amount for carrying out the operations of business on day-to-day basis. And if you have lesser amount of working capital, that means you will not have sufficient amount to pay off your creditors or your current liabilities. In both these cases, your working capital management is poor. That is what it indicates. Now, moving on to the most important part of working capital, that is computation of working capital. Moving to the computation part, we have the gross concept and the net concept. In gross concept, working capital is given by total assets, total of current assets. Working capital in gross concept, to get working capital, you just need to add up all your current assets including cash, bank, prepaid expense, inventories, debtors, bills receivable, etc. So you will get working capital. That is what does the gross concept mean. Now coming to net concept, you know what is the difference between gross and net. To get a gross amount, you will add up all the things that is available to you, and to calculate the net amount, you have to deduct something from the gross amount calculated. The same procedure applies here also. That is, in order to get the net working capital, that is the net working capital is equal to current asset minus current liabilities. Alright, so you have to get, first you have to take all the total of current assets, then you have to take all the total of current liabilities, and you have to deduct the same from current asset to get net working capital. If in the question you are asked to calculate working capital, you are meant to calculate working capital under net concept, that is the net working capital. Unless otherwise it is specified, you have to calculate gross working capital. If you are asked to calculate gross working capital in the question, you should do that. That is, you have to take the total of current asset. Otherwise, if you are simply asked to calculate working capital, you have to calculate net working capital. That means you have to deduct the current liabilities from the total of current assets. That's it. Simple as that. We are going to move towards the most important part of the working capital, that is operating cycle. Operating cycle means it is the time that is taken for conversion of raw materials back to cash. So this is the picture of the operating cycle. First you start off with the cash in your hand. with that cash in your hand, you will purchase the raw materials, and raw materials is then converted into work in progress or semi-finished goods. From that, you convert that again into finished goods, which is converted into sales, and sales will in turn give you trade receivables or debtors or your bills receivable. Then that is converted back into cash. So this entire procedure is known as operating cycle. You can calculate operating cycle in days, weeks, or even in months, depending upon the question and the data available to you. So this is the entire process of operating cycle. Now, in order to calculate gross duration of operating cycle, that is gross duration of operating cycle, you have to add the time taken in each of these conversion and you have to add it up. Okay, so suppose for conversion of raw materials, say it takes about 3 weeks, and from raw materials to convert it into work in progress, it takes about 5 weeks. 5 weeks. And for the conversion into finished goods, say it takes about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And for the conversion, finished goods conversion into sales, it takes about 1 week. 1 week. Now, for converting sales into trade receivables and from trade receivables to cash, back to cash, say it will take a month or 4 weeks. 4 weeks. Now, the gross duration of operating cycle means you have to add up all these weeks. That means 3 plus 5 is 8, 8 plus 2 is 10, 10 plus 1 is 11, 11 plus 4 is 15. That will give you 15 weeks. So, the operating cycle, duration of operating cycle is 15 weeks. So, once you have purchased raw materials or once you have converted your cash into raw materials, it takes about 15 weeks to realize that cash back again. Alright, so this is what is meant by duration of operating cycle. I told you can calculate this in days, weeks, or even in months. That depends upon the data that is available to you. So here I have calculated operating cycle, duration of operating cycle in terms of weeks. In the later sessions, we will discuss a problem with relation to conversion period of operating cycle. I hope I have provided you with all the basic information regarding working capital. In the coming up sessions, we will be discussing problem with relation to computation of working capital and also duration of working capital. So please don't miss my next video and do subscribe to my channel. And if you like this video, please like and share it to your friends. Thank you.